This is our last section over evolution. In this section, we're really going to get into talking about natural selection and what some of the evidence that Darwin presented for natural selection and evolution. This is going to lead you guys into your final project. A lot of your project will be based around the theory of evolution and survival of the fittest and adaptations that animals have that make them most fit to their environment. So we'll start out. So after Darwin went around his voyage around the Galapagos Islands and things, he wrote a book. In his book, he proposed the mechanism for evolution called natural selection. And in this book, he presented evidence that we're going to talk about, that it's been taking place for millions of years, and it continues to take place. Now, it happens so slowly that in our lifetime, you can never actually see evolution take place. You can see it in the early organisms. You can see it taking place, but it takes so long. In our lifetime, you don't actually see evolution take place. Now, where Darwin started out, he talked about artificial selection. People have been doing artificial selection for that many years. So what it means is that plains and animal breeders, they breed the largest hogs, the fastest horses. This is called artificial selection. What artificial selection is the selection by humans for breeding useful traits from the natural variation among different organisms. Now, a pretty good example of artificial selection right now is dogs. We breed dogs for useful traits. Now, here's a pretty good example. You have a golden retriever, and you cross it with a poodle, and you get one of the very popular dogs called a golden doodle. Now, one reason those are very popular right now is because poodles have a very useful trait that they don't shed. So one reason a lot of people are crossing dogs with poodles is because you will get a type of dog that does not shed. So that's an example of artificial selection. There is a useful trait, a variation that people are actually wanting in that animal. So Darwin felt like that maybe nature does that also, is that nature is going to provide the environment to live in, and the animal that is best suited for that environment is going to be the one that survives. Now, one thing that leads to evolution is that animals in nature have to struggle to survive. What Darwin realized is that high birth rates and a shortage of life's basic needs, such as food, space, water, it's going to make organisms compete for these resources. Now, why that's important is that while the animals are competing for these resources, whichever one is going to be stronger is going to be the one that survives or is best fitted for that environment. So, we ask ourselves, how is natural selection related to the species' fitness? So let's talk about what fitness is. I think you guys have heard of the survival of the fittest. Now, if you're going to go and you're going to get fit, the idea of what getting fit means is you're going to become stronger, you're going to become faster. When we talk about fitness in evolution, it is the ability of an individual to survive and reproduce in its specific environment. Now, fitness also includes reproduction, because to be the most fit, you have to be able to reproduce and produce more offspring to make your species last. Now, Darwin proposed that fitness is a result of adaptations. So, an adaptation is an inherited characteristic that increases an organism's chance for survival. So if you look down below, you have, the insect down below. Its adaptation that it has developed is the camouflage. That's one adaptation that's very useful for many organisms. Now, this could have been a mutation, but the thing is that whenever this happened, those organisms were the ones surviving because the predators couldn't find them. Same thing with the one on the right. It's very hard to see, but it is camouflaged in there. So other ones, some of the adaptations that they have is making them faster, making them larger. A giraffe has a larger neck. That's an adaptation because it can reach higher up in trees, and that allows it to survive because it can get the resources that many other organisms can't. Okay, so that makes it more fit. Because of similarities to artificial selection, Darwin referred to the survival of the fittest as natural selection. So in natural selection, the traits being selected contribute to that organism's fitness in the environment. Still below, all of those organisms, the three pictured, nature is selecting for them because they are the most fit, because they adapt to that environment they are in because of their camouflage. So what happens is over time, natural selection is going to result in changes in characteristics, or the inherited characteristics. These changes increase a species' fitness. So if an organism developed some sort of mutation to make them more fit, it's going to pass on those traits, and then that entire species is going to have those traits, making them more fit. Now that brings us with descent with modification. Natural selection produces organisms that have different structures. They are able to establish different niches or occupy different habitats. Okay? Each living species has descended, but when we talk about descent with modification, it is with changes from the other species over time. And that's where we get the descent with modification. Now, here is the evidence that Darwin presented for natural selection. The four that I'm going to talk about are, he used the fossil record as evidence, geographic distribution, so where they live at, homologous body structures, and then we talk about similarities in embryology or their early development, and I'm going to go through each one of these. So the first one, Darwin looked at different fossils, and he was able to compare fossils and from older and younger, and to compare their body structures, and this led him to believe that some animals were very similar and some were very different, but he was able to use that as an example of, evidence of evolution. The next one is the geographical distribution. Talking about that, when we talked about biomes and during ecology, we know that some places have very similar climates, and what he found is the places with similar climates have very similar species, but they're unrelated. So all of those species are similar because they have a similar environment, and those adaptations make them more fit. So although they are not related, they are similar because they're trying to adapt to their environment. Now, homologous body structures. What homologous body structures are is that structures have different mature forms but develop the same embryonic tissue. And I'm going to show you pictures of that. What it means is, at the bottom, you see the ancient lobed finned fish. And although it's in a fin, the bone structure that makes that up is very similar to all the, you can see the turtle, the alligator, the bird, and the mammal. So mammal, like ourselves, the tan bone would be the top bone, the humerus, okay? And then you have your radius and ulna, the carpals, the metacarpals, and then phalanges. So saying all of those bone structures, although they appear different, they have all of the similar bones. Here's another pretty good picture of that. So the top gray the top gray bone would be the humerus. The orange and tan would be your radius and ulna. The yellow are your carpals. And then the last brown ones are the phalanges. Now, although all of these animals have very different looking arms, the bone structure is still similar. They have the same bones. So we call this homologous structures because they are the same, but they are visibly different, such as fins and wings, things like that. Now, as we're talking about homologous structures, there are some structures that don't serve an important function, and we call these vestigial organs. Some vestigial organs are in a whale. A whale, you can see on the bottom, it's C, that would be its hip bone. That has no use for a whale, so we call it a vestigial organ. On humans, one of our vestigial organs is an appendix. So in us, it is believed that at one point in time it was functional in ancient ancestors, but as we have evolved, the appendix really has no use anymore, so that would be one of our vestigial organs. Another evidence of evolution is similarities in embryology. If you look at embryos of many animals, the beginning is very similar. The backbones, how they look, are very similar. You look at a chicken on the left and a human on the right. Now, this is very, very, very early stages in the embryo, but you can see similarities in how they start to develop, and then as they specialize, they become very different, but those are embryos. Now, so as far as evolutionary theory, scientific advances in many fields of biology, geology, and physics have confirmed and expanded these hypotheses. Like we said, it's still a theory. It's still being tested, but many advances in this science is confirming these.